It's all good.
Well, it is 9 o'clock, so welcome to the May 3rd work session for the Board of Education for Lewis Palmer School District. Ms. Wood, could you call the roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz? Here. Mr. Taylor?
Here?
Ms. Upchurch?
Here.
And I believe Mr. Clausen is absent and excused this morning.
Yeah, he has a work conflict that he couldn't change this morning. So to view the live stream video of this meeting, please go to the Lewis Palmer School District 38 YouTube page at www.youtube.com/user/LPSD community. If you could all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll jump right into agenda item B1, which is the community survey and engagement data. This is scheduled for 30 to 40 minutes. Mark Belcher will lead this conversation and presentation today.
With our friend Ryan from Magellan, who partnered with us on this survey. Thanks for the time this morning, all. I'll just set this up and say that we approached this survey with a couple of goals in mind. The first being something that you may remember from our Priority 5 deep dive, which was developing an understanding of what our community feels about D38. So that's that perception piece. The next piece is understanding what voter support might be for a potential ballot initiative, and we will dig into that a little bit more this morning. I think you'll find that there are some incredible insights here, and we'll let Ryan talk a little bit about some of the construction, and I'll jump in, but we'll also allow for some question and answer throughout, so feel free to interrupt.
Great, thanks, Mark, and thank you all for your time this morning. As Mark said, as we walk through this, feel free to interrupt me, and we'll take questions throughout with any questions you may have. But just for those, again, understanding the survey objectives that Mark just covered, it wasn't just talking about gauging voter support. It was also just trying to get a sense of the image of D38 and its teachers among the broader community, not just parents, not just community members, as really everyone that we wanted to hear from. The methodology was basically a kind of a kitchen sink approach, right? One thing we did is we sent text messages to roughly half of the registered voters within the school district. So they received that. That's the way to really get community members who may or may not have any other ties to the school district. Then the district was also sharing it via email and social media channels as well. And by that combination of methods, we were able to get 2,633 completed interviews, which is a really strong response rate within the district, and gave us a lot of good information to go off of, again, not just on the potential MLO, but also just on the district's image rating in general.
I will just add to that with some of our district pushes, we were able to push to people not necessarily affiliated with D38. So it's not just our parents, it's not just staff members who responded. So.
Yeah, and I will add that last point there is that the data is ultimately weighted to reflect a likely November 2022 electorate, and so it's not as if we just got the data and are presenting it to you untouched and raw. We're trying to get it to mirror what we expect turnout to look like in November. So let's start out, we didn't jump right into the MLO. We started out talking about the district's image rating, and this is a very strong. Basically, the way we ask it is, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Lewis Palmer School District 38? And you see that over 3 and 4 respondents have a favorable opinion. 38% have a very favorable opinion. And you see there's not a tremendous amount of difference among the different demographic subgroups that we have broken out there. So just again, a really strong measurement and a good starting point whenever you're thinking about going down this road towards an MLO. related question, but obviously different when you specifically mentioned, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the teachers who work for the district? But again, a very similar measurement. 3 out of 4 have a favorable opinion, including, I'll point out on this one, 46% very favorable opinion. A lot of that obviously is coming from parents, 86% favorable opinion of teachers among parents. Obviously, among non-parents, you have about a quarter of them who say, I don't really have anything to go off of, right? I don't have an opinion of teachers because I'm not necessarily engaged or involved with the school district currently. But among those other demographic groups, again, not a tremendous amount of difference, which we will see here coming up in a few slides. At job approval, again, it's kind of a third question we ask. Sometimes you see a different measurement here. In this case, we didn't, right? 74% approve of the job Lewis Palmer School District is doing educating students. And I think, again, this just speaks to the reputation that the district has in the broader community of being a generally high-performing district that people are happy and satisfied with. Fiscal responsibility. This is when we're kind of edging our way towards asking them about a potential ballot measure without directly asking it quite yet. And we ask, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Lewis Palmer School District 38 is fiscally responsible and spends taxpayer money wisely. And this, just over 50% agree with that statement. You have about a quarter who disagree, and then you have that roughly 1 in 5 who don't have an opinion. Just again, you see the non-parent number is higher, you see the 65 and older number is higher, just people who aren't spending a lot of time, in their average day or average week thinking about how the school district is spending money. But again, it's an okay measurement. We've seen it higher. We've also seen it lower. It's kind of right in the range of what you would expect. Okay, now we're just asking a general question, prefaced with this statement. Before we continue, you should know any revenue that comes from a property and tax increase would be evenly distributed across the district, including the district's charter school monument academy. We thought that was important for respondents to know that information ahead of time. And then we asked, would you support a property tax increase to fund salary increases? So we're not talking about amounts, we're not talking about any specifics, we're just saying, in general, would you support it? And 55% would support, in general, a property tax increase to fund salary increases for all school district teachers and employees. And that and employees part is key because as you'll see as we talk a little bit more about the verbatims of some of the responses, some people appreciate that it's all employees, some people want to make sure that it's going to teachers, and it's just it's an important thing to highlight for respondents that this is going to everyone. And this is really the first place where you see a significant, what you would call a gender gap there at the bottom, where women are significantly more supportive of this than men. As far as the other demographic groups, kind of not surprisingly, this is what you would see in pretty much any district. You have Democrats who are more supportive, and then Republicans and unaffiliates are right there again at 55%. In this community, they make up a higher percentage of the likely November vote, and so that's what drags the number down to 55. I should say drags, but it's still over 50% majority support, which is solid. Then we get into the specifics of a potential mill levy override, where we asked, and we didn't call it that, just we're trying to avoid terminology that people may or may not be familiar with. And so we're careful to call it a property tax increase. And we asked them, we explained to them the district is considering a ballot measure for the sole purpose, and that's important to point out, this isn't going to go to any number of different things. This is specifically directed at funding a 10% salary increase for all teachers and employees. The cost would be approximately $5.5 million and would be funded by a 9 mil property tax increase. And since the average person doesn't really have any conception of what a mill is or what that's going to cost them, we spell that out explicitly. A 9 mil increase would cost a homeowner about $300 annually or $26 per month on a home with an assessed value of $500,000. And so knowing that, would you vote yes and approve this ballot measure, or would you vote no and reject it?
I'll just add before we move on that we used some general numbers for that question. That's not necessarily what would be reflected in language that you might see, so.
Sure, yeah, and I believe, you know, we talked last week and Mark said the numbers actually look a little bit better than that, so.
Yep.
Which is good. The concern is that what you actually end up putting on the ballot looks significantly different than this, and I don't think that's the case, so. And what we found is that 56% would vote yes, 40% would vote no. Now, I will say on this question, we're trying to get a sense of how people are leaning. And so if you take out the lean towards yes and lean towards no, what you have is 44% support and 30% oppose, and then a much higher number who don't have an opinion or who are undecided, right? And so this is a solid starting point. These things are typically kind of dead on arrival if you can't even get over 50% when you include the leaners. And so that's not where this measurement was at, obviously. It's, you do see the gender gap there. Again, women are much more supportive of this. Democrats still very supportive, and even have a small majority of support among Republicans and unaffiliated voters, which is important also among non-parents or those who don't have a student currently in D38.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the difference between this slide and the previous slide, the breakdown?
So this one is just a general, would you support a property tax increase? And this one is asking, knowing the information that it's a 9 mil increase to fund a 10% salary increase, and that it would cost homeowners about $300 annually on a home with an assessed value of $500,000. So this one just fleshes it out more. It's more specifics given to the respondent. But to your point, there's not actually a significant amount of difference between the two.
Yeah, as we move forward, you'll see a lot of slides that look similar. The small differences between them are where we really learn what people think about us.
Right, and what we have seen in the past is, and this is how you know that you're at least somewhat on the right track, is, oh, sure, I would generally support something, and then this one's support really falls off a cliff. When we're asking too much, right? Like the numbers don't make sense to people, they're too big. So you avoided that kind of pitfall right off the bat here. And then we get into what we call the message testing, right? And so this is basically, here, before I distract you with that, this is basically we are giving to respondents facts and information about why the district is considering moving forward with this 10% salary increase for all employees. And just trying to get a sense of, okay, what really moves voters and what is kind of a dud or shouldn't necessarily be emphasized.
But in this slide, you switched the color coding.
What's that?
So up until this point, the orange was favorable, and now the orange is, if I'm reading it right, more likely to.
Yeah, no, that's.
So I had to flip my head.
No,
because I was like, whoa.
Yeah, my apologies for that. That's thanks for pointing that out, and that's something that just make sure we do kind of have to shift gears here, and this is using a template that we've used multiple times. I'll make sure we change that just to line them up with the previous slides, and just so you don't have to have that shift in your thinking here. But these are the top three messages. The top message that moves nearly 2/3 of voters to be more likely to approve is basically just informing them that there was an analysis conducted by a professional consultant that found that D38 teachers and employees are underpaid on average 10% below comparable positions at 10 peer school districts in the El Paso County region. So it's not a nationwide comparison. It's not even a statewide comparison. It's a regional comparison. And people appreciate that. They appreciate that fact that you went out and got data, and now you're presenting them with the data and saying, look, this is why we want to address this, because we have identified the need. Message number two is somewhat related. It makes the case that the district is unable to retain and compensate teachers at a comparable rate to other school districts in our region because of state funding shortfalls. Furthermore, the school district has not raised property taxes to fund teacher and employee salaries since 1999. And some people are probably aware of that fact, some people probably aren't. But it is helpful for residents and voters to know that to the extent their property taxes have increased since 1999, that money's not going towards a potential increase in teacher salaries. And then the third message, again, is just kind of speaks to those slides off the top where people are happy and satisfied with the district. They appreciate that there are high-performing schools in the district. And specifically here, we mentioned Lewis Palmer and Palmer Ridge and how they're consistently ranked as top high schools in the state of Colorado. Mentioned the college entrance and state exam statistics, and just again making that slight little case, that little nudge that without increased investment, the district won't be able to maintain the excellence our community has come to expect. And those are really the three top performing messages. Now, I will say, whenever we do messages like this, where we're just trying positive messages and we're seeing what works and what doesn't, typically, and here's the next slide, typically, you know, it's designed to be a message to move people. So it's almost always going to be above 50% because that's how it's designed, right? And sometimes we will test negative message testing. We didn't do that in this survey specifically. But just expect that, yeah, I know where you got to draw the line somewhere, right? And so the way to look at it is on the orange and green on this slide, right, where you have more likely to reject and no opinion or no difference. If that number is above 40, then basically what you're saying is even on this message that's designed to be positive, 40% of the people, it's not moving them to be more positive. And so that's just, it's kind of an important kind of distinction to make. Look, yes, all of these messages have some benefit to some people, but there are some that are more effective than others. And here we have kind of the argument that the district is facing a crisis because of, again, that statistic that 20% of the district's 750 teachers and employees left for other employment opportunities in the last year. And just making the case that if we can't provide a meaningful pay increase, that trend is likely to continue or may continue. Another statistic there, again, more than 60% of D38 teachers have earned a master's or doctoral degree. If approved, this ballot measure will help ensure that they remain in the district. Okay, people appreciate that. Message number 6 is that the district is second to last in the El Paso County area in per pupil funding. The amount of per pupil funding is determined solely by the state, not the school district. And you know that, and you see in the verbatims when we ask them, we'll kind of get to those in a little bit, and I would encourage you all to read over that document when you have the time, the verbatims. But you see that this is a little bit of what we call kind of in the weeds, an argument where, hey, you know, I know we're second to last in the area in per pupil funding, but when a lot of people hear that, they think, well, why is that? Isn't that something that you all have decided that you're, like, why don't you just change that? Why are you second to last? And so it is important to make to let them know that it's determined solely by the state, not the school district. But again, that's a little bit of a tricky argument to make to people because they still think, well, shouldn't you do something about that? Shouldn't you remedy that somehow? They still kind of view it as kind of the onus on the school district to figure that out and make sure it doesn't happen that way. And again, it's just it's kind of a lack of understanding about the complicated way that the state funds public education that many people just aren't aware of.
I'll just add to that one of the other important things that we thought about with this survey is we have an opportunity. We're going to be in front of a lot of individuals. So what kind of information do we want them to see right off the bat? So this was also very informational. So getting messages out there like last in per pupil funding and we don't set it is important for people to see.
Sure. Yeah, and you know, this is a good slide because it really covers two really kind of different arguments and maybe shows kind of the limitations of both. The first one is more of an emotional argument Over the past 2 years, due to COVID, teachers and employees have reached a tipping point, and they've kind of expended everything they have and given everything they have. And they're very proud of the district. They love the kids, and they want to keep working here. But some of them, if a salary increase isn't possible, some of them may not be able to continue working here. That kind of message. And again, it's just slightly less effective than the other messages. And kind of in the same vein as that per pupil funding message, we have this longer message where we're explaining to them the budget stabilization factor, right? And this is, I said that last one was in the weeds. This one is really in the weeds. Just trying to get a sense of, okay, how much do we really need to spell this out to the respondents? Or is it better to keep a message that's kind of short and to the point? And this one, you see 42% of people, it doesn't resonate. It either makes them more likely to reject, or it doesn't make a difference in their opinion. And I will say on the budget stabilization factor, there's some sentiment where respondents say, well, that sounds like an issue that you should resolve with the state, right? That's something that you all should get fixed at that end, and then you won't have to come to us and ask for a property tax increase. That's kind of the line of thinking among respondents on that, or at least among those respondents who are either more likely to reject or don't have an opinion based on that fact. And these are the last three we have. Again, a little bit in the weeds, but just informing, as Mark said, the only way for the district to receive property tax payments directly from homeowners is for voters to approve a dedicated property tax increase, also known as a mill levy override. The last time a mill levy override was passed in the school district was in 1999. Again, there's some people who are probably aware of that fact, but there may be new people to the community who really aren't aware of that. And I saw a little bit of that in the verbatim responses, people who moved from other school districts, and they hear that and they think, wow, we always passed mill levy overrides in my old district. So it's new to them, or kind of shocking to them that hasn't happened since 1999. Of course, that's people who moved from elsewhere in Colorado. Unlike other school districts in Colorado, D38 continued in-person teaching and district operations. That gets you 56% more likely to approve, but it's not necessarily germane to this conversation about salary increases. And then you have the last or the least effective message, which is just explaining that, again, to Mark's point, just trying to get the information out there. Hey, the district received $3 million due to federal stimulus dollars related to the pandemic, but those aren't sufficient. We can't use those as a sustainable source of funding for teacher and employee salaries, and making sure that the respondent understands that you're not just sitting on a bunch of money that you could be using for this. Just, again, informing the respondents. And then we ask what we call an informed ballot test. So this is basically the exact same question we asked before, but we said, thank you for taking the time to read that information. We reminded them of the specifics about the ballot measure, and then asked them, if the election were being held today, would you vote yes and approve, or would you vote no and reject it? And you see that support bumps up a little bit to 60% would vote yes. 35% definitely vote yes, 23% definitely vote no. Those are the two largest groups there, which is not surprising. You see a little bit more intensity on the yes side, but you do have roughly a quarter of voters who are definitely voting no, kind of no matter what they hear or understand about this, and I think that's important to consider. Still have the gender gap remaining there at the bottom. And again, you still see that younger voters are more likely to support, and support kind of falls off among the older age groups. A lot of that simply is due to the fact that it may be older voters who are on fixed incomes, and even if they would welcome it or would like to vote yes, they just can't afford the property tax increase in kind of an uncertain time for them. So this just kind of shows the movement, right? It moved up by 4 points the total no dropped by 6 and the undecided dropped by 2. Sometimes you see more movement. This one didn't have a lot of movement to begin with. I mean, you know in any case it's not going to be up at 70%. So still 56 to 60 is a solid move. But I will point out there on the right side, among respondents who would vote no on the original ballot test, 84% of them are still a no vote. And so there were 16% of the respondents who initially are voting no, who either moved to yes or at least moved to undecided. And here's kind of the movement among subgroups, right? It's roughly 4 or 5 across subgroups, but I wanted to include this to point out that among that 65 plus age group, where they were below 50% initially, once they hear that information, they get above 50%. There's a 7-point move there. And so that's kind of the voter that, again, is not really engaged on a daily basis with the district, but when you go to them and when you present these facts, obviously some facts resonate more with certain voters than others, but when they are informed about what the district is doing or wanting to do, they are receptive. So that just speaks to the importance of kind of if you move forward, of a well-funded and well-organized campaign to really educate people about the need for this and why the district is doing it. And so these are just kind of cherry-picked verbatims of just trying to pick representative examples of each of these themes for why 60% of voters would vote yes. And we said, this is how we phrase it: please describe the reasons why you would vote yes and approve it. And you just see a lot of teachers deserve it. They have pride in D38 and they wanted to continue the excellence in schooling to continue. And then they just understand the challenge of retaining teachers. Like this person on the top right there, cost of living is higher and this area can afford to pay our teachers what they're worth. They want to make sure that teachers can afford to live in this area and continue to work here. And then, we need to support our educators in our schools. The schools and the educations my children have and continue to receive is the reason we bought our home here in Monument. There's just a lot of that, a lot of just general support for the schools and support for the teachers. And that's pretty typical when you ask a question like this. Some people want to spill their guts and be very specific about it, but it's just a lot of kids of the future. We love the schools. We want them to do better. And hey, we understand that teachers deserve to be paid more. Here, on the no voters, right, why roughly a third would vote no, you do typically see more specifics, and so I tried to pick some shorter answers, but I encourage you to read through the verbatims because some people are writing novels there basically on all the issues that they have with this. But here, the major themes, right, are that taxes are already too high. And in a couple senses, taxes are too high and so we shouldn't raise them more, or taxes are too high so you should already have enough money. You shouldn't have to do this. They don't trust how money is spent by the district. Again, if you think back to the original slide, there was over 20% of voters who said that they didn't trust how the district spends money. A lot of them are showing up here. Personal negative experience with the district, there was some of that. And then just a lot of, it's not the right time, right? With inflation and rising prices, this is something that we shouldn't be asking of voters right now. Again, and you can kind of read these and just get a flavor for why people would vote no. Taxes are too high. The district needs to get spending under control and prioritize, just like I have to do with my fixed income. That's a pretty representative example of why someone is not on board with this. And then I don't.
On this?
Oh yeah.
There were roughly 2,600 respondents.
Yeah.
Is that right? What percent of those respondents made comments?
Oh, it's we don't we kind of force them to at least say something. So some people just said NA, but of the respondents, I would say over 90% left comments, just because we don't.
At least a sentence.
Yeah, exactly. We don't. So some just say NA or nothing, but we don't give them the option to just click through the comment box. They have to type something. And I'm glad we did that in this case. Sometimes it really affects your ability to complete responses because people don't want to give their thoughts. But on these kind of local ballot measures, typically someone will at least give a sentence or two about why they think the way they do. And they appreciate that you want to hear from them, right? And I don't have a slide for the undecided, but not surprising, a lot of the undecided is just, I need more info, right? I need to know more about this. I need to do my own research. We also asked, as a follow-up, would you be more likely to vote if yes, if it was a 5% salary increase and not a 10% salary increase? So again, just spelling out what that would look like, what it would cost, the $5 million increase, what it would cost on a home with an assessed value of $500K. And you see a little bit of a difference. It jumps up to 62%. But honestly, that's not enough of a difference in my mind to justify considering a smaller increase. And what you actually see is that among some subgroups, like Democrats, let me go back here, Democrats were at 81%, and now they're at 76%. And so there are voters that you would actually lose by trying to go with a smaller ask. It is more popular. It's that there is more support there, but it's not significantly higher than asking for a 10% salary increase.
So another question on this?
Yeah.
You can go back to that slide, please. You said the delta's not really enough to be significant. Is there, in general, a tipping point where it is enough?
Sure, yeah, I would say, if it moved by 10 points, right? So if this was at 60 and now you're all the way up at 70, you're in like a very comfortable spot. But a lot of why I say that is because this is already at 60, right? If this was below 50 and this one was above 50, right, that would really kind of justify it. But since we're already up at 60 and since it's only a 2-point jump, that's why I say that, just because it's again, would it give you a higher likelihood of being successful? Yes, it would, but not enough to really justify, again, because if you do this, the 5%, you're still 5% below comparable districts in the region, and so you're still not quite where you need to be, and it may not solve the issue that you're trying to solve. So as far as the summary and recommendations, again, just going through this, a large majority, 77% have a favorable opinion of D38, teachers have a strong image rating, and 46% have a very favorable opinion of teachers, which is a great place to start, right? So clearly there's a significant amount of pride in D38 among both parents and non-parents. At the same time, when we get into the fiscal responsibility and the fiscal arguments, just 52% agree that the school district is fiscally responsible in spending taxpayer money. And that's a very common measurement for a more conservative community. It's not out of the norm at all. But for the measure to be successful, voters need to believe that D38 has been and will be responsible with the money. And so to kind of gain that trust, never hurts to have specific examples ready of how D38 has been good stewards, and that those kind of examples should be emphasized, right? And then after reading information, support increases from 56 to 60%, again, with the largest movement among those age 65 and older, which is key because they're the most reliable voters in a midterm election. They are going to show up. They're going to be there. The most effective messages, to me, can be summarized as quick, easy to comprehend, and then they emphasize the district status as a high-performing district. So personally, my recommendation is don't get too much into the weeds because you kind of lose some effectiveness at that point. And people just think, well, this is a complicated argument. They must really not have a good, simple argument because they're making it pretty complicated. And again, the most common reasons given for supporting it, teachers deserve it. We need quality teachers. They understand that it's difficult to retain teachers. And then for rejecting it, taxes are too high, not surprising. The district needs to spend money better, personal negative experience with schools, and again, that this is just simply not the right time. Here's the demographics if you're curious, roughly 50-50 male-female. Again, these are what we expect turnout to be in November, and so you see over half of the voters are over the age of 55. And so that just speaks to how crucial it is to reach out to those voters. Some of them do obviously still have kids in school, but a lot of them don't. And then you see the party demographics there as well, where over half of the likely voters in November are going to be registered Republicans. 31% are unaffiliated, and 14% are Democrat. And we weighted it so that it was 30% parents, 70% non-parents. I don't have data on exactly what that number should be, but it's kind of a conservative guess as far as what turnout's going to be, how many are going to be parents, how many are going to be non-parents. And then here's the demographics as well, if you're curious, by each community, where nearly half came from Monument and then on down the list. So,
Can I ask a question about so total respondents, 2,600 and change? How many surveys went out?
so again, we sent a text message to roughly half of the registered voters in the district. So I think it was around 15,000, 16,000, around there. And so and then part of that 2,600 is also obviously the efforts that the school district was doing. How many emails did you all send out? Mark can answer those questions as far
Yeah,
as.
we sent multiple emails to lists of about 10,000 each time we would send an email. And then beyond that, I can pull some of our online statistics for you. It'll just take me a minute.
So when you said 15,000 texts went out and that's about half of the registered?
Yeah, we had and it's just, we basically sent a text to anyone that we had a cell phone number for, right? Like, we're never gonna have 100% cell phone coverage of any population. I wish we could, because that would be fantastic. But on average, in really any community around the state, we're gonna be able to scrape together roughly half of voters we're going to get a cell phone for. And that comes from two different sources. It comes from the voter file, the list of registered voters. When they register with El Paso County, they provide their phone number. And we have software that identifies whether it's a landline or a cell phone. Obviously, landlines are really declining, so most of the numbers we have now, we know are cell phones. But then we also have a third-party vendor that you basically send them a name and an address, and they send you back a cell phone number for that household. And so just trying to cover as much of the population as we possibly can. What's really a concern is when you know that the population that did get a text message is significantly different from the population that didn't. And that's not the case here. The population that received the text message was representative of the community as a whole. It's just simply that we didn't have a number for every single person in the district.
So can I assume from your discussion there that there's about 30,000 registered voters?
Yeah, I think that's right. Let me just pull it up here.
Actually, Ryan, I'm looking right at it.
Are you? Okay.
The active registration across Monument, Palmer Lake, and our other area is 29,000, just over 29,000. And just for perspective, the 2021 voter turnout was 14,600. The 2020 voter turnout was 26,640.
That's driven by a presidential election.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so a midterm turnout this year is going to be somewhere in between those two.
So just for my understanding here, we get about a 10% response rate, roughly, of total potential respondents, 2,600 out of 29,000. It's roughly 10% return there. But of those who vote, the numbers between 14 and 20, what was it?
26, between 14.
Do you have the 2018 number in front of you there?
The 2018 turnout was 21,266.
So that's
Probably realistic.
when you compare election to election. So 2018 as the last midterm is roughly comparable. I would expect it's going to be probably around 22,000.
Yeah, it'll be a little higher just of growth probably. But
Yep.
So then we're at about 8% respondents of those who vote, 7 or 8%, right?
Yeah.
Of this group, 54% identified as Republican, this 2,600, right, this subset.
Yeah, and that's how the data is weighted.
Understood,
Yes.
understood. But in our registration, this 29,000, is there a percentage by how they are registered?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll explain it a little better. So the raw data that we actually got on those 2,600, it was not 54% Republican. I could tell you what it is. I don't have it off the top, but basically we weighted the data so that it matches what we expect the November turnout to be. So I think what it was is that we had a little bit higher unaffiliated response rate and a little bit lower Republicans. So we actually had to weight up Republicans. So maybe they were at 49% instead of 54. So we weighted them to match the turnout.
Just so I'm clear here, these survey results are weighted, not raw?
Correct.
Are you certain they're not raw?
What's that?
I wonder if maybe we're misunderstanding each other. You had 2,600 respondents. If 56% said, yes, we would vote for it, do we take 2,600 times 0.56, and that's the number that said yes?
So yeah, maybe I'm not explaining this correctly. Let me actually, I can tell you what the raw percentage was. I can pull it up right here. And that maybe that number will help us kind of understand better.
But while you're looking that up,
Yeah.
let me share the thought I'm having, and that's, so we have 2,600 respondents to this survey, which is 10% of the potential voters, 7.5 or 8% of those who will probably vote, likely voters, which is 22,000. And this weighted results is reflective of 7 or 8% of our voter community, correct? Do we know how many of this group, this 2,600, are affiliated with the charter schools versus the public schools?
We didn't ask that as a demographic question. We just kind of kept it all together. That might have been good to know, and we can pick out, a lot of times in the verbatim responses, someone specifically said that their kids go to the charter
We didn't
academies.
measure it.
But no, we don't have that measurement specifically.
Okay,
Just whether they were a parent or not.
right.
Right, whether they had a child within the district. Pardon me, I'm almost here, getting what the partisan break.
What is that demographic? Because that's not listed on this last summary survey demographics, parents versus non-parents.
70%.
Yeah, so that
No.
that right there is how we weighted it. Again, Mark or Casey may know more exactly what that number is or should be, but we weighted it at roughly, considering who's going to vote in November, it's going to be roughly 30% parents and 70% non-parents.
Which is pretty consistent with what we have come to know about our community in terms of the representation of whether or not they are an active parent or not.
May I ask a question? Partially to Mr. Taylor. So thank you for bringing up a deeper dive into the how and the what of the numbers. I'm going to take a guess because my mind was going in a similar place. The goal of Mr. Taylor's, and likely Mr. Taylor, and certainly my questions are, can we take the wonderful work you've done here and come up with an analysis of what it means on a vote if 22,000 people in our community were to vote tomorrow on this issue, and what the likelihood would be of those 22,000 votes? And we would likely do it based on if these indicators are close, it would likely be based on political affiliation. If those voters are parents of children in the schools or related to the schools in some manner, and that would likely be the swaying components, 2 or 3. Is that, Chris? Is that sort of what we're trying to get to?
What this is telling us.
Yeah, and how we relate it to a go
future
no go
decision.
decision.
So if I may, we do have the aggregate, as you guys are looking for, and what you just described is this presentation. It's been weighted down to be reflective of the community and to be a representation of what our community likely thinks and would take action upon.
Yeah, and,
Right, so-
and potentially the word weight might be misconstrued by certain members of the board, me included. In reading it, it's my understanding that the numbers are the numbers. The weight is simply applying a demographic to the numbers.
Sure. Yeah. So
Correct.
Oh, go ahead.
If I could, is it fair to say it's being extrapolated, not weighted?
Sure. Yeah. So let me. The numbers I have in front of me here, I think will help us all to better understand this. Of the raw data, those who completed the survey, 40% were Republican, 15% were Democrat, 42% were unaffiliated, and 3% are registered with another party. Now, a lot of those other party are people who just don't want to tell you how they're registered. But So, just as I said, so Democrats, dead on. So that's the weighted number, and we had 15. Democrats are fine. Unaffiliates, we were too high. Republicans, we were too low. So we had to wait. We had to take the Republicans, who came in at 40%. Well, we know that they're going to be more than 40% in November. So we weighted them up to be at 54%, and we weighted the unaffiliated voters down to 31%. And so that, again, we can't completely predict the future, but that is what we expect turnout to look like in November. And just an example actually from this community that we did last year. We were working for the town of Monument on a 0.5% sales tax increase for public safety. We did a survey that was in structure and form basically identical to this one, right? We got measurements basically on the town. We explained the need for an increase in a 0.5% sales tax increase for public safety, which had actually failed the year before. They needed it, so they went back to voters and asked for it. We laid out the message testing, and what we found was 64% of voters would support it. Now, the actual election results in November, it was 63%. And so I am very confident in this community, but also just the methodology broadly, that this is an accurate measurement of what would likely happen in November. Again, assuming there was a well-organized and funded education campaign to make sure that people understand why the district is asking for this.
If you go to the next slide then that shows the 70-30, what that's saying is 30% of these respondents, of the 2,600, are parents,
Correct.
and 70% are not. Does that correlate to the broader 22,000 or 29,000 numbers in our district?
So yeah, again, I know exactly who voted as far as their age, their gender, their party affiliation. I don't know exactly, so it's kind of an educated guess as far as students. But as Casey said and Mark said, that's in general kind of the feel, and it's pretty typical in most districts around the state where 30% are going to be parents, 70% are going to be non-parents.
Could be a little higher, could be a little lower. We've seen around 35%, so this is a conservative guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Of
Yeah.
6,500 kids, you're talking about roughly
65 to 12 to 13,000 parents, so
Well, that would be very high.
that would be
in my-
very high, right?
Yeah.
Well, 30% of 22,000, 6,600, right? So that's about this number of kids, but there's sometimes two parents, right? So
Right.
it's, I don't know.
Not in our communication system.
But you also
that's-
have parents with multiple children.
Right.
So that, when you're talking 6,600, it's probably not a raw 6,600. It may be more like 4,000.
So, but it's relatively close,
Sure.
then, is what you're saying here, is
Yes.
that percentage of parents versus non-parents is probably relatively close to what we see district-wide.
We believe it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Our communication system is about 7,000 parents, just under.
So another question on this that's really important for us to understand. We had roughly 2,600 respondents. Those are unique individuals, right?
Yep.
Nobody responded twice that we know of, correct?
Right.
Okay. Or multiple times. What, out of the 22,000 or so that we're anticipating voting, what number is statistically significant enough to give us an indication of what's going to happen? Is this 4 to 6% significant enough? Where in your business does that tipping point lie?
We had a minimum, if I remember right, and that minimum was 600.
Yeah. So we're well above. You would see you see pollsters putting out a statewide survey of Colorado voters that has 500 respondents, and they're calling that they're hanging their hat on that, right? So I would say that of the again, that roughly 22,000, the fact that we got 2,600 interviews is well above the threshold we need to be statistically significant. Yeah.
In order to give us a strong indication of opinion?
Yes.
Okay. The other question I have is, was your team able to discern from the responses if at the end of the day, is this an emotional, economic, or logical issue?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And, you know, for the different districts that we've worked in around the state in the past year or 2 years, really since COVID, it's a really relevant question, right? Because some districts, it is going to be the emotional that you're going to play on. I would say that's less the case here. I would say this is more of a logical argument that needs to be made.
What gives you that indication?
The very top message here, based on a salary analysis conducted by a professional consultant, right? And so this isn't a gut feeling, we feel like our teachers aren't paid as much. You all went out and got hard data for comparable districts in the region, 10 peer school districts in the region, and found that on average, teachers and employees are paid 10% below comparable positions. And that's what people responded to. They need to know that this isn't something that, oh, hey, you know, let's do this. Yeah, great. It's needed because the district has, and here's the other message here, last year 20% of the district's 750 teachers and employees left. So to me, that could be an emotional argument for some people, like we're losing our great teachers that we all love. And yes, that's not a complete dud of a message, but I just think in this case, for this community, the best message is to present the facts in a way that's quick and easy to comprehend, that doesn't get too far into the weeds. And that's where you get into kind of that economic argument, so I guess I'd say it's a mix of logic and economics, but if you're too much into the weeds, you kind of start to dilute the effectiveness of the message because you're expecting too much of voters and you're saying, hey, you all need to really get educated before you vote, which is great. That's fine if people want to get educated. But at the same time, it's really important to present the facts in a way that is important or that is easy for someone who's not spending their time thinking about public school funding in Colorado to comprehend very easily without spending an hour and a half online doing research about the budget stabilization factor, right?
Clean information and good, strong facts are our best tool.
I have questions too. And I think I've hashed this out a little bit, but I still want to ask to it. What's the difference between can you clarify how we know with confidence that this survey, besides the fact that we had so many more respondents this time around versus June of 2018 when we got the study, and granted that was only 302 people that were surveyed, but the survey results for that MLO came out the exact same. They were 62 in favor, 32 against, and 7 undecided, and obviously we know that did not have a lot of success at the ballot box. Now there was only 302 respondents, and those were done in person and by phone. How do you settle the mind of this one is definitely more solid than that one?
The first thing I want to say to that, and maybe Dr. Summers can add some color to the 2018 survey, but we pushed really hard to get survey respondents who were not affiliated with the district, to the point where we stopped kind of communicating that the survey was even out there and only pushed to those who might be outside our realm, including those in the 65 plus crowd, 55 plus really we wanted to push to. So we did that both via text messages with Ryan and through our online pushes. We were able to target who we wanted, and we said not somebody who is affiliated with the district, not somebody who likes our pages, and preferably among older individuals. So what we see in the results is we definitely reached those people. So I would say we have a statistically significant number of respondents. They've been weighted, and I'm not 100% familiar with that survey you're mentioning, but it doesn't sound like it was conducted in the same manner.
And Ms. Upchurch, I'm looking to see if I can track this down, but to my recollection, I believe the percentage of parents that responded to that was significantly higher than the percentage ranking that we're looking at with this current survey.
we really wanted this
Yes,
to be
53% had child, I'm looking at child attends district and schools, 53%.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that answers your question,
Yep.
right? So even though the numbers are the same, I think, you can explain that by a couple ways. Like, that's obviously pre-COVID. COVID hasn't completely hit the reset button, but it's made people kind of view or consider public education differently in ways both positive and negative. But the fact that over half of those parents, or half of those respondents were parents, really explains why that number is so high. If we were to weight this to be 53% parents, the numbers would be even higher, I would assume. And so I don't know how that survey was conducted. The other thing I would say is that if it wasn't accurate as far as what the partisan makeup was, if over half the respondents weren't Republican, do you have that? Is that data in there at all?
Let's see. It shows no education level, age range.
What was the age range?
The age range was age 45 to 59, and then female 18 to 54, female 18 to 54, registered to vote and it had the times that people had been living in the district and registered to vote.
Yeah, I just question exactly how that was done, because it doesn't sound like it could have been weighted to try to accurately reflect what turnout was going to be in 2018 with any degree of accuracy. And so, again, I'm confident in our methods here because, one, we've seen them be accurate in this community before.
Okay.
But also not just in this community, but in other communities, both more progressive communities, more conservative communities around the state. It holds up, right? Obviously, it'd be great to spend a month doing live telephone interviews and focus groups and really digging into it, but it's very expensive and time consuming to do that. And so what we found is that this kind of methodology is really kind of a sweet spot between not being very expensive because you're not you're not hiring a live call center to call through and make all these interviews, or hiring someone to do focus groups, which is, again, pretty labor intensive. But at the same time, you're able to kind of meet people where they're at and give them a methodology for completing the survey that's very user-friendly, that's very easy for them to use. They don't have to complete it all at once. They actually could stop and Google something and then go back to the survey if they wanted to. There's nothing that's preventing or stopping them from doing that. And so it's really just trying to get that flavor, that feel of the community, and the fact that we got 2,600 completed responses. And I should say, too, that we have more data. This is only the people who completed the survey. And so I haven't necessarily gone through and looked, okay, are the numbers different for those who dropped off? Most of the time what we see is that once you're kind of in the middle of the survey, you're probably going to finish it unless it's egregiously long, which this one wasn't. But I'm really, I really do think, it's, I can see why you would question it because the numbers are the same.
Same, yeah.
But I would just say that it doesn't sound like the two surveys are created equal in that sense. So
One other quick point. That survey was designed to ask both in regards to the potential of a bond and a mill.
Yeah.
The details of that mill, the details of that bond had several items that were built into both of those asks. So I just want to make sure that as we're putting all that information out there, that we really are separating out. It's a completely different type of survey.
And not a purpose-built question.
Yes.
Fair enough. I just wanted to make sure that
Sure.
when we're having the dialogue and the discussion, that's what the work session's for. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is this one was more comprehensive and more cost-effective.
yeah, sure, that's one way to look at it. Yeah, and again, I can't speak to how that one was conducted, but I can just tell you that I'm really pleased with the response rate that we had on this one. I think if you were to attempt to do an all phone survey, which is still kind of the gold standard in some people's minds, the response rates on phone surveys are dropping to around 1 or 2% in most cases.
And I'd
We-
still be on the phone today, so.
yeah, Mark would still be calling people today because you didn't want to blow the budget with the call center.
Right.
So yeah, this is really the best methodology for getting an accurate look that has a great response rate, and really that can kind of, as Mark said, present information to people in a way that kind of can stick in your brain. Whereas if someone's just reading you facts, 10 minutes when you're off the phone, it's like, oh, I forget what that guy said about, what did he say? Well, this one you can go back and look at it and see, oh, okay, that's what it was, so.
And I can't remember where I was trying to find where I read this. That's when you're looking at these surveys, 60% is you want to be you don't want to be below 60%, that it's harder to pass below 60% when you're doing these surveys, and a good sweet spot is between 60 and 65.
Sure, yeah, no, that's, you do, oh, that's the 5%.
That there's a plus or minus.
Sure, you can kind of, you want to be conservative and assume that, worst case scenario, support's not going to grow, it's going to shrink, right?
Right.
And so you don't want this to be at 50%, right? And so, yeah, you're right, 60% is a good number. 55% to 60%, higher than 60% is great. It's really, I'll say there's two things that determine whether a ballot measure is going to be successful, two primary things. One is the actual language itself, right? And two is the existence of a well-funded, well-organized campaign to educate voters about what is happening and why the district is coming to voters at this particular time. So many times we will see a survey that looks good like this, and then there will be no campaign group organized, nothing like that, and it just kind of peters out because voters don't hear anything about it in between April and May when they took the survey and November. And so it just, it must not be that important. I haven't heard anything about this, but I'm getting my ballot and I'm looking through the tax questions, and I'm going to vote for the ones that I've heard about, that I've heard my neighbors talking about, that I've seen signs for, that I've heard messaging about online. And so that is absolutely crucial, especially in, more conservative communities. That is something that has to happen. It's not something where you can just kind of take these results for granted and say, okay, good, we can skate to the finish line here. Because I've seen that mistake happen too many times. And
Excellent. And Ryan, that actually is a good bridge into our next
Sure.
work session item, which is potential MLO implications and next steps, which is tied to this survey. And I don't want to cut it short, but it's 10:05 and time is of the essence here. So is there any final questions or comments that anyone would like to make on this survey itself?
I have a strategy question. I don't know if it's related to the survey or the next one, which is basically if there's factors when voter turnout, like the gubernatorial race or ballot measures, would that be more appropriate in the next one or this one?
If I'm hearing your question correctly, Ms. Upchurch, the next item is really more about the mechanics and the design of what the MLO would look like in terms of the numbers. So if it's more of a voting question, it probably is now, would be my assessment. Can you ask that one more time?
So if there's other factors that affect voter turnout and the likelihood of voters voting in favor or against a gubernatorial race or a ballot measure that's a statewide measure, if there's any other factors that play into this that are not in this right now being considered.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I can speak to that, and I'm happy to hang out, and we've done enough of these where I can speak to maybe some suggestions on the ballot language as well. But obviously, for something like this, the higher the turnout, the better. The more irregular voters are the younger voters who maybe don't show up quite as high certainly not in odd years, not quite so high in midterms, but in a presidential year, like if you had your pick of which year to run this in, I would say a presidential year. That's going to be the best turnout for you because what drives turnout is the top of the ticket, unfortunately. And that's just like, the why people vote is incredibly nationalized at this point, right? And so if there's nothing, if the president's not there, it's like, okay, is there a governor's race or a Senate race? That's what's driving turnout, and you've just kind of got to piggyback on it, knowing that you're at the bottom of the ballot, but knowing that, again, because of forces that are beyond your control, some of these voters who are likely to be more supportive are going to show up and vote. Now, you can try 9 different ways to really, like, why aren't these people voting? They should be voting for this. And yeah, you can target people who are unlikely to vote and try to turn them out. But if you have unlimited resources, sure, you could. I would recommend, obviously, trying to change the turnout to get more of these younger people to vote. But the fact remains is that turnout really doesn't shift much from comparable election to comparable election. And so I'm pretty confident that we're going to be around 23,000 people voting. And, some of them are going to be new, younger voters, of course. But the more regular voters are the older voters who have a long history of voting. They're going to vote. And so it does matter. I mean, it's a good question, right? Because some people think, oh, it doesn't matter what year we go. It absolutely matters. I mean, to Casey's point about a turnout in an odd year compared to this year is like, or compared to a presidential is half. Half the people voted in 2021 compared to 2020. And so those double voters make a huge difference in the terms of something like this passing or failing. So.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions before we leave the survey? All right, hearing none, then let's move to B2, potential MLO implications and next steps. This is Kitty and Casey will present this.
Thank you. So as we continue this discussion, it leads to looking at this through the lens of priority 4 of the strategic plan, which is fiscal responsibility. So one of the questions that brings up is if we were to go with some form of a mill levy override question next year or this fall, what would that look like in terms of our mill levy structure? So this analysis really just presents the historical trend line of our mill levy structure as well as a projection of what that will look like going forward with and without a potential MLO question. So what I'll do is I'll go through some of the assumptions that were made in order to project out what the mill levy trend would look like. And also I'll point out some key data points that might help as we discuss further potential MLO. Thank you, Mark. Is that better? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to the graph next. So anytime you're looking at projections, of course, there are assumptions that have to be made. The assumptions in these projections include an assumption of 4% growth in assessed value. This is a pretty conservative estimate based on historical increase in assessed value, as well as thinking about how much assessed value has increased over the last couple of years. So 4% seems to be a bit conservative. Other assumptions include we are aligning these projections for the red line you see there is the trend based on an MLO ask of 5.4 fixed mill levy. So when we think in terms of an ask, this represents asking for a fixed mill that would generate $5.4 million in year 1. That's the red line there. The black line is a trend line dating back to 2012 and moving forward as a projection to 2030.
What causes the red line to go down over time?
So, yes, of course. So, some of the key data points here that I'd like to point out, we have 4 series of bond issues right now. The first of those is about set to pay off in December of 2024. So that first drop will be when that first series pays off. And then over time, it continues to drop because of expiring bond issues that we currently have. The last one is set to be paid off in 2029, December. So you can see from the black trend line that the mill levy has been steadily declining. The MLO passed in 1999.
1999?
Thank you. That is not a fixed mill, that is a fixed dollar amount, so it takes less mills over time to generate that $4 million that we have in our budget, as well as we pay off those bonds, it continues to decline as well. So that continual decline in the total mills is depicted by the black line. You can see very easily that if we do nothing, our total mills projected out to 2030 are way below what they were in 2012. Even with a potential MLO ask of 5.4 fixed mill, the high point of our total mills is at 47.94. And that is still way below what we were even at in 2015.
So does that mean, if we put this in terms of dollars for a taxpayer, so let's use me as an example. I have a county assessed home at $500,000.
Right, we do have a mill calculator here that helps to inform any taxpayer about what it would cost in terms of this particular ask. So,
Thank you.
yes, and
But here's my question.
Sure,
Apologies for interrupting.
it's okay.
If in 2012 I had a $500,000 assessed home and I'm a citizen of this area, how much would I have paid of my county tax for the schools? And if we did nothing in 2030, how much would I have paid?
Ron, I couldn't hear you.
That was on purpose. I'm trying to understand from our sponsors, stakeholders, customers' standpoint, in raw dollars out of their pockets, if they have an average home in the average neighborhood, and we look at these lines, and we start with the far left, and we look at 2012, and let's just make an assumption they paid, out of their $2,000 a year in taxes, they paid $500 for schools. If it continually goes down from 52 to 31, that's essentially a 40% decrease, which would be 200 to 500, right? So are they going to end up paying $300? And my question behind it is, does the state make that up to get us to our PPOR? Because if it does, and one is a smart shopper, one looks at this and says, does this mean I can get the state to fund my education versus me? That's what's all completely behind my question. I want to understand this in the manner that several of the Magellan survey respondents are thinking.
Let me add a couple thoughts there, because the split between the state and the local property taxes are limited to the statutory levy here, which is the green section. Everything above that is not a part of that split that you're mentioning. So that's just one point.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you. So it's not necessarily a savings to our constituents, is where I'm trying to make sure we're clear. And we need to be clear to them.
Well, you could look specifically at that $4 million MLO that was passed in 1999 and say it is less over time because there is greater assessed valuation that is able to draw from the community to pay off what that $4 million is. So you are reducing your amount respective to that 1999.
But you're paying more in your from your assessed value anyway, so it's a net zero. It balances, correct? Because it gets to a net.
Maybe. I think that's a question that we could help zoom in on, because the other factor obviously is the bond mill and how that is being repaid over time. As that diminishes, now you have less mills that are total program mills, still a higher assessed valuation rate. So depending on the homeowner, depending on the dollar amount, it's possible that it's net. It's possible that it could be,
Right.
yeah, that's variable.
Yeah.
I was trying to make sure I understand your question. If you're on the override, if it's a mill override, that, yeah, like to your point, Dr. Summers, over time, when you have more people, there's more, the financial obligation is spread out amongst more people. So, you chip in $40 to come up with $120, but you add 4 more, now it's only $20 each.
Is that impact correct?
That-
Or does that come out of the state? Does the state chip
It's
it?
completely separate. That blue bar is completely independent of any state formula because it does not represent the School Finance Act. The green bars, which represent higher mill increases all the way up to 27, which we know was just recently passed from state statute.
Right.
That relative property tax amount is still increasing, and the state is still creating the formula that offsets the total number of property tax dollars compared to what's coming from the state for the PPOR baseline.
Right.
Anything else on top of that, including bond and MLO, is sitting on top of that.
Tiffany, ultimately where I'm trying to get to is a very simple cash analysis for our constituents, which says in 2012, I paid $500 a year for the schools. What am I going to pay in 2030? And what am I going to pay in 2023?
And that, I would think, would also depend on, obviously, the valuation. Like, with my response would be, we have Amendment 23, and we have the 10th Amendment in Colorado. So as our value of our homes go up, and you went with the conservative 4%, there's a ballot initiative that might cap it at 3%. But as that value increases over time, our Constitution says that 50% of those dollars go to education. And our Constitution also says that in Colorado, it is not the state's responsibility to educate our children. It is our responsibility. The state subsidizes they set the minimum that it would take to educate a child, and then what we can't reach with our property taxes because of when we started Gallagher, for example, it was 20% of our taxes, of our home's value, 20% of that. Our homes were valued, 20% was taxed. Now we're down to 6.9. So as that's gone down, that's why the state is subsidizing more, not because the state is responsible, but because the state is subsidizing more. So when you're asking, how much am I going to pay, I guess that would kind of depend on what the valuation is, right?
We could run some numbers for you, Mr. Schwartz. We could easily do that. And I
Thank
think
you,
to your
but-
point, Ms. Upchurch, there's a multitude of
If it's
variables.
an exercise in futility, please don't do the extra work. My bigger concern is our constituents knowing what the click to cash is.
How does this affect each individual taxpayer in our community?
Okay.
Yeah, and
Makes sense.
what was I paying? This analysis is great, right? What was I paying in 2012 when I started this analysis for my schools?
Gotcha.
And what was I paying? What will I pay in 2023 if this passes? And what will I pay in 2030?
If it passes or if it doesn't?
Either way,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And similarly, frankly, we should do the same thing for the fire department and police departments, because the community has funded significant increase in taxes for those two entities.
And certain parts of the community for special improvement districts as well.
Yeah.
But, I think Ron's question made me think that there is an element of complexity here in the statutory levy being changed. And that's right in the flow of what we're talking about. And that has to be well explained because there's going to be an impact there. And we have to make sure it's well communicated. What is that impact that's done statutorily versus the MLO, which is more voluntary?
Sure,
But it is another layer of complexity.
sure.
Thanks, Ron. I'm sorry I wasn't understanding your question.
It's okay. I'm having trouble understanding it too. It's not straightforward, so you have to plug in the influencing factors. And I'm trying to bring it down to something that our constituents can consume and absorb and make a decision on.
Sure, makes sense.
Any more questions on the presentation?
I would like to add that this particular simulator for calculating the dollars associated with a mill, this is a stagnant picture of it, but it's also available in an Excel document so that you could change it to say 1 mil, and it would tell you, you could easily then calculate for your own home value what it was in 2015, for example, how much that cost in terms of 1 mil for your price range, your assessed value of your home, and then extrapolate that out to the current situation to see where that 7.45 mils would impact the individual taxpayer.
Yeah, there's a fun old term called a WISM. What's in it for me? So we just do a WISM analysis.
And can you use this simulator to go beyond 2030? Or is there a reason
It's really
cutting
just in
off?
terms of how much 1 mil calculates out to in terms of your assessed value at any point in time. If you were to say, well, in 2030, my assessed value will likely be extrapolate 4% more value, then that would impact the cost to you as a taxpayer, right? So
Right, I was just wondering if there's a reason why this graph cuts off at 2030.
the reason the graph cuts off at 2030 is we pay off that final bond in 2029, so it's sort of the low point that we can project to.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions about the presentation specifically? Because I want to redirect toward next steps because that's part of what we're talking about, and I think that's, again, back to you guys. But before we jump there, any questions at all on this presentation?
Any question you would like us to ask that we have not asked?
I would point out perhaps that the focus of this particular MLO question is on compensation, which is in alignment with survey results, some of the community feedback that we've received, and just our priority 3 of honoring our people. But we also have other considerations as a district in terms of long-term planning and capital needs. So while those are not the focus in our discussions today, it's still part of what we need to be thinking about in terms of long-range planning. So I think the mill levy structure can kind of show that there's potential there for additional needs that might come up in the future without changing dramatically what the structure looks like.
How?
If you see the amount generated, the dark blue line between, that's the 7.45 ask. Over time, as the bond drops, the mill levy, the total mill levy declines as the bonds are paid off. So even if we were to need to go out for a bond question in the future to address capital needs, we wouldn't have to be asking for much more than what we had 5-10 years ago in terms of a total mill. So I think the potential is there for additional funding needs in the future based on where we are with our total mills, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Kind of, yeah. Processing through it, like what that would look like, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure I articulated that as well as some of my peers might, but if we're looking at this graph, in my mind, we're so far below what we were even 5 or 10 years ago that asking to maintain a higher total mill over time doesn't seem like it would be a big burden to the average taxpayer.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
So that's a great message, right? The question still, I think, for the taxpayers, the question I think we have an obligation to answer is, what was I paying then? What am I paying now? What am I going to pay later?
Mm-hmm.
So at least they can understand the animal, and if it's more, they can plan for it. And there's no surprises, then we're being fiduciarily responsible, and we're doing it together.
Kitty or Casey, what are our next steps then? Let's pivot, because I think we understand what we've been seeing, but the agenda item calls for next steps.
So, if I may, Mr. Taylor, thank you for that. I believe it will be important for us as a district to have clarity in whether or not we are looking to pursue the MLO as we have at least described it, both through our survey and through this particular mill structure projection analysis. I'm not sure that that necessitates clarity as early as today, but I do think it would be important to understand where our board sits relating to clearly a lot of work that would need to go into a potential campaign, recognizing that there are limitations that we have as district employees in that process. Clearly there would be a lot of information that we could design and deliver as we work through this summer. And I guess the only other thing I would add to that, Mr. Taylor, is if that were the direction, thinking about the timeline from how late we would have to let the county know about our intent to put something on a ballot, which I believe is actually the end of July. Official language for a ballot initiative would not have to be approved formally until sometime in August, and I can get those specific dates for you. But our goal today was to present everything that we have done up to this point. Obviously, we've had a lot of conversations about compensation, and this represents, I believe, the next step in terms of where are we headed with that particular ask. And so however you want to facilitate that conversation, Mr. Taylor, that's up to you all.
Let me start with, do you feel like you've got a feel for the board and where we're at, or would you like us each to maybe just reflect on?
I think it'd be helpful to hear those reflections. Absolutely.
Would you all mind if I go first? I normally wait till the end, but I'll just go first if that's okay. I wish Matt were here. Unfortunately, his work precluded him from being here. So since the last campaign that I was involved in, I've maintained that we need a comprehensive long-range strategic plan, and the aim was in that comprehensive plan that we would recognize all the needs, as Kitty somewhat alluded to, that there's room here in the future to address. So for me personally, I'm not persuaded that a single purpose MLO is the right approach, because I've been working hard and hopefully helping guide us as a district, or as a board, to look at a comprehensive plan, which I know is more complex than this single purpose. But having said that, that's my initial reaction. Within this space, there's a lot of work that's not done yet here. We had a compensation survey from, let me get the date, I think it was in March 1st, and it went through some detail, and there was a lot of effort put into comparing us to other districts. At the time, I remember our conversation going along the lines of what we want to do is to fix our comp structure, the steps and so forth across these various groups. The 3 groups we had were admin, exempt, and staff, I think, or anyway, there's 3 groups, but within there's different classifications and different steps. And the whole concept, as I recall, was that we would try and become competitive with our peers. I haven't seen a proposal yet saying this is what our structure is and this is what we think it needs to be in order to get there. The bottom line of this presentation in March 1 was in one area we're under the average by, just a second, I'll name the area, sorry. So in classified, we're at 8.4% below market. In certified, we're 9% below market. Administrators is 11.4% below market. Now, I don't know, again, if that's an average or a weighted average or exactly, is that the impact? So the question I'm raising, based on the survey today and the presentation today, is where are we on this number 3, narrower, not comprehensive, but a narrower single-purpose MLO as it relates to number 3?
Would you like me to respond to that just briefly? Or
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Because we are in active conversation and development of a revision to each of our 3 salary structures for those 3 groups that you've mentioned. So I would say the group that is the meatiest to work through is really our licensed salary structure with our teachers specifically, and that is information that I think we're in a position where we will have more that we can share as early as potentially our next May meeting, if not, certainly no later than the June work session. So we're happy to go into that detail. What I believe you will see with all of that in perspective is that the cost that it will take in order for us to execute on those plans comes in right in the neighborhood of what this particular mill structure, the way that we've designed it, would be looking at. Which, one more note, out of that $5.4 million, if put on the ballot and approved, we have to acknowledge that approximately $1 million of those dollars would be passed through to Monument Academy. So really we're looking at about a $4.4 million need. And then the way this is constructed is to help us keep pace over into the future in terms of what those adjustments would be, both from a market perspective as well as the revenue that an MLO would generate.
I appreciate that. And the reason I'm bringing that detail out in my initial reflection is because one of the things I see in the survey result that was least favorable for us all is financial management of these resources that we have. And I think we need to have a pretty detailed plan of what we're really talking about.
Absolutely.
I don't think a 10% across the board is a sufficient presentation that we're managing these fiscal resources the way they would expect. Let's put it that way. So my point is, when I see that the weakest part of the survey is fiscal management of these resources, then we better have a really detailed plan that shows why we're doing it and how it compares. Everything we've talked about, it just needs to be laid out.
We
At
absolutely.
the core of a campaign, we've got to be in the weeds.
Yeah, we would concur, absolutely. And what I will say is, for the purpose of simplicity, at least in the ask, that was where the 10% on average is coming from. Because to get into
For a survey, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Sure.
I understand what you
Yeah.
said. I'm just reflecting. So the reflection I have is next steps is we better have if it's going to be truly single purpose, which again I'm not a proponent for, but if that's where we go, then we better have a very well-defined fiscal impact of that single purpose. That's my reflection. And with that, I'm going to pass.
Thank you for that feedback.
I'll just go to my left. Tiffany?
So when I reflect on what I've seen, some of what you've said, Chris, goes through my mind as well. Before I would feel comfortable, I would feel more comfortable knowing the specifics before voting on a general. Does that make sense? In other words, similar to what Chris is saying, I would want to see when we look at 10% or 5%, what have you, that we see the gap in our starting salary. We see the gap in our some of our certified staff, and I don't feel comfortable saying let's just go for 5.5% and not knowing how that breaks down, because once we say yes, if we say yes or if we say no, but either way, we need to be able to immediately turn around and walk out those doors and know why we voted exactly, specifically being able to explain it. So I think that having those specific details, it would also give me more confidence. When I looked at the survey and I look at our undecideds are at 6%. Yeah. Well, but what I was going to say is the lower number, 59% said yes. The 10 number, only 57%. So I'm looking at these numbers. I understand that it says that our Democrat constituency would be less likely to vote for less dollars, which I don't understand that. I would be curious about that, but I know I would not be comfortable with asking for the 10% across personally, which when I'm looking at this the way I understand it, we're looking at the smaller one, the 5 point.
So if I can, because I think it's really important, I want to make sure there is no confusion about the basis for the 10% additional revenue. That's essentially what we are projecting is needed in order to get all of our salaries up to market compensation. So we are currently talking about that using the average of the 10% difference and recognizing that that does not necessarily mean, across the board 10%. That means that that's the revenue that would need to be generated off of a mill structure in order to have enough revenue to be able to do everything that we're trying to do across the board. So if I hear you correctly, you're saying you want to understand the same specifics that Mr. Taylor was speaking to in terms of how does that factor out across all three employee groups.
Yes.
We don't have that right here today for you, but that would be
Right.
the next part of the information that we are
But
happy to
if I may, I think
spell
the
out.
point from all three of you is this is not a peanut butter spread.
Right.
Okay, this
Correct.
is 10% is a financial number of $5.4 million.
Correct.
And then it's up to the professionals to determine where the school district, the students, and the citizens get the largest return on that $5.4 million, correct?
Absolutely.
I also want to reflect on, I would love to be able to give our staff and our teachers, and I think that they perform above and beyond, and I'd love to give them above and beyond. And I'd love to see our community do that. But I think what we need to focus on is being competitive with our competitors. I think if we ask too much, then I fear that we're setting ourselves up for failure. I also, when I looked at the comprehensive, what the feedback was, and to your point, Mr. Taylor, there is a distrust with how money is managed. So I actually think, then that's why I do think that a single teacher only would be the only way to success, because I feel like it opens the door to be too broad, and our community has expressed that they don't feel secure with where and how we would use those funds. So I think that the more we tie our hands and the more specific in this circumstance, and not that there's lots of priorities out there, and I think that our comprehensive strategic plan that we have, I think we're doing a lot of great work with that, and I think we should push forward with that. My priority would be teacher compensation, and that doesn't mean that everything else isn't important, but this does need to be a priority. So I would only support a single subject for our staff, and preferably, to be quite frank, I think that our gaps are across our staff, across our district, but I think our community would be more receptive to if it was our student-facing staff that were on this ballot, and that we found another way to make up the resources for other staff members, if that makes sense. Certified and licensed.
Yes, I believe it does.
And that's just my reflections. I mean, there's more to reflect on, and that's why I appreciate being able to continue to reflect on all this information that we've absorbed. But I think it does need to be a priority that we are taking care of those that take care of our kids.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Not right now.
All right. Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm at a point for a comprehensive reflection this morning, but I'll give you my current thoughts. I think that after the last two bond elections, Chris, to your point, the two takeaways that I really have mulled over the last couple of years are that a long-term comprehensive approach was necessary in order to create that trust with our community in a better fashion. I think also the second point was that bond language that included more than one aspect was confusing and tough to move through. And just, from a campaign perspective, there's a short run up to a campaign, so it's tough to inform people on everything that's needed. To those points, I feel like the last going on 2.5 years now with the long-term strategic plan, we do have that basis now. I think it's been well communicated. I think it's been well thought out, and we've also communicated that it's a fluid way of working. It's not a concrete structure that we're working toward a goal and we'll be there in 5 or 8 or 10 years with our long-term strategic plan, but that we can still function and put pieces within that at any given time. So I think that a single specific bond issue could move forward as, for lack of a better analogy, a Lego piece in that strategic plan. It doesn't mean that we're doing things in a patchwork or haphazard way necessarily. I think it means that we are being intentional with the long-term strategic plan and in parallel moving forward to reduce a pay gap that is really significant in our region. And I think that anecdotally, I have been amongst our staff in our school sites and speaking to a lot of my neighbors. Anecdotally, or across the board, this is the conversation that's occurring. It's about compensation, and I know some of us were at the Palmer Ridge Engage and Elevate. After the Palmer Lake Engage and Elevate, when very few people showed up, I think there was a conversation about, well, if there were something wrong, people would have shown up. At Palmer Ridge, there were 8 tables, if I remember correctly, and without any direction other than just giving the strategic plan, the main conversation that came up at 7 of those 8 tables was compensation across the board. That was organic, that was not directed. And anecdotally, I know that a couple weeks ago, one more point, we are in hiring season, as I understand from the last meeting. And given that pay gap, I've also had conversations where a few weeks ago, just to name one example, we didn't get I believe it was a 5th grade teacher in here because she would have taken an $18,000 pay cut coming from a district south of us. She actually was willing to take an $8,000 pay cut to come work here in D38 because she appreciated the culture. But we have teachers who are not able to come in here because of the pay cuts they would take. I think the specifics are really, really important. I think the survey data is really important. I think the pay schedule, very, very important to put out as much information as we can to say specifically what we need and why we need it. And I think it all can fit in and fits in well with the strategic plan that we've been working on all along. So those are some of my initial reflections.
Thank you, Teresa.
Sure.
Ron?
So a lot's been said, and I'll attempt not to be redundant. I have one question before I begin. Market pay. The term market pay, is that in the, I use the term parity, is that in the 48th to 55th percentile of the average for the state? Is that what the team is thinking?
We would envision, of the 10 regional peer districts that we are comparing ourselves to, being at least within 5% of the average pay across all those 10 districts. So,
On either side based on the classification?
correct.
Okay. So, in its simplest form, I actually concur with Mr. Taylor that ultimately a constituency or an ownership should approve the overall direction of an entity. Having said that, I'm actually, in its simplest form, in favor of doing this now, as long as it's purpose-built and singularly focused. The rationale is very simple. I'm a believer of pay for performance. The last decade, the performance has been somewhere between very good and stellar. We're currently significantly below that. We're currently in an environment in all markets where pay is moving up significantly, more really around supply and demand, not inflation. Inflation certainly is an issue today, but it will ebb and flow. Secondly, it appears from the team's survey data that the community has an appetite for this type thing now. So to Ms. Phillips' point, if this is part and parcel of our overall plan to do several things to build a platform so that when we're no longer here, the people that move into this community with their children know they're going to get a rock solid top 10 percentile education, and their children will be quality members of the communities they choose to be in. I'm all in favor of that, and I think almost every single homeowner and business property owner in this neighborhood is as well. So that's what makes our country good. Okay? Finally, it's also valuable for the teams that work for our district. One of the things I did almost 3 years ago, before I agreed to attempt to run for this seat, was a bunch of research, which meant human-to-human contact in the schools with various constituencies. And the one thing I learned very, very quickly in this 4 to 6 week analysis was culture good, morale bad. Pay is absolutely not and will never be the only issue, but it is a large driving factor. And as everybody knows in large organizations, when that's over, there'll be something else to complain about, just like in our homes sometimes. But the fact of the matter is, if the team is performing in the 85th to 95th percentile and we're paying them in the 45th percentile, that's not good. That's all I have.
Dr. Summers?
So I appreciate the sharing of that feedback. I think if I could summarize what I believe I'm hearing in our next steps is that our board would desire more specificity in terms of exactly how we're projecting the potential of an increase in revenue through the passing of a mill, so that there is more clarity in exactly what is being proposed from an execution standpoint. I am hearing general support for doing something sooner rather than later. However, I'm not interpreting that yet as the official blessing, if you will, to go forward. So what I would envision is us coming back as early as this upcoming board meeting, no later than our next work session, which is scheduled for June, with that level of specificity, as well as what I would request is really more of an official formal approval from the board, if that is the desire of the board as a whole to move forward. I believe that would be very important for us to have it no later than June, because again, there is a lot of work that we need to do between now and when an official campaign season would be kicking off. Is that a fair summary, Mr. Taylor?
That's a fair summary. I'm just going to add one point here, and that is within the constraint of a comprehensive plan, the board can, or the district can, choose a single purpose bond. So when I made my statement, it isn't like I'm for or against. I'm not being anecdotal. I'm actually trying to help give perspective that we are managing the system in a comprehensive fashion. And because of the following factors and reasons, we've chosen to do this. I haven't seen that yet. So that's what I'm saying, okay? I want to be really clear, because I'm not hearing anything from my fellow board members that I don't disagree with. I'm just saying that it still has to be from the perspective of a comprehensive plan. That's what I want to be clear. I hope that's helpful. Otherwise, we are about out of time, so we need to move on. So our next item, and I'm going to actually have to amend the agenda now because we've run out of time. We've got 10 minutes, and we've got a learning services update that I want to go through. Can we defer the legislative update, or is there something happening that's urgent to be discussed there?
I believe we can.
Yeah, I do too. I've already shared the information. End of session is in a week, so it'll all be wrapped up by then anyway. There will be some ballot initiatives to talk about then. And I can share my other reflections for my board member reflections time.
Mr. Taylor, I'm really sorry to interject one more thing. I know some of our team is in a position where we have to go support the lunch serving. That does not include Ms. Wettstein at this point. She's able to deliver her presentation. I believe that might be. So we're juggling a little bit of a logistical.
No, I'm aware. That's why I was trying to push this along.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Wettstein, let's go through yours relatively quickly.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Summers, are you running the
Yes, I will pull it up.
slideshow? That
Yep.
would be great. Thank you.
Gotcha.
I have 3 items I'd like to provide an update on, and I'll try to be as brief as possible and then answer questions or concerns that you may want to discuss. I'll be sharing an update on the review of our physics curriculum, some information regarding one of our vendors, Illuminate Education, and then a very brief update on preschool legislation. So first, we did conduct a review of the Colorado academic standards related to science. We talked about this at a previous board meeting. And our teachers have recommended that they continue the use of Holt Physics, the current textbook at the high school level. And in addition, we have an exciting opportunity to use some of our allocated curriculum funds to supplement our current physics curriculum at the high school level, but then also extending into the middle school with an innovative curriculum called Physics in a Box that was developed by Dr. Glushenko, who is a professor at UCCS, who also happens to be from Ukraine and is donating some of the proceeds from the curriculum that he's developed back to his home country. The proposal for these supplemental materials will provide students with very hands-on, innovative approaches to learning physics. And the research that Dr. Glushenko has done has shown significant increases in math achievement, which is why we are proposing extending to the middle school level with that curriculum. The proposal also includes very extensive professional training for our teachers on a weekly basis beginning next school year. So I'll pause on that one. Are there any questions about physics?
I have a question. I will try to be brief. For the sake of consistency, are you going to have the supplemental materials? Can the public be able to review those?
So that's a good question. We actually thought about how we might do that. The materials are very hands-on and would require a demonstration to understand how they would work. So in lieu of a community demonstration, we have provided links with videos and all kinds of information in the board packet, and we would be happy to email that out to families as well to take a look at. We're not considering this a curriculum adoption since they are supplemental scientific experiment materials that students would use for hands-on activities. But I'm open to suggestions you may have.
So we can, if our general public would like to have information to look into it, we can email them the information, and if they have questions, comments that they want to share and feedback, then they can email that feedback.
Absolutely, and all of those materials have been included in board docs already. We can certainly send them additional information if they are interested.
Moving on.
Okay. This next item is a formal update on a vendor that the district uses called, it's Illuminate Education is the vendor. The product that we use, owned by the parent company Illuminate Education, is EduClimber. You may remember past presentations from Dr. Benton that many districts across Colorado used a product called Alpine Achievement Systems, which stored individual student plans, such as our READ plans and our advanced learning plans for our gifted students. And in addition, Alpine provided us with data visualizations so that teachers could log in and take a look at how their students were scoring on state assessments, for example. Alpine 2 years ago was acquired by Illuminate Education, and the district made the decision to continue to partner with Illuminate and to migrate all of what was in Alpine Achievement into their product called EduClimber. We were notified on April 11th that there was a data breach that Illuminate Education experienced, along with, which impacted, if you read the news, the entirety of New York City public schools, as well as many districts across Colorado. We then conducted an internal investigation, as we are required to do as a district, and we determined that no social security numbers or financial information was impacted, as well as there is no evidence of misuse of the data that was compromised. We do have some relevant board policies, as you will note here, JRCB and the regulation, which requires us to look closely at a contract when there is a data breach, and we did that. Part of that policy requires the board to decide whether or not there may have been a significant breach of contract, and if so, to hold a public hearing to determine whether the contract should be terminated. At this time, we are not recommending that we, while there was a data breach, after much examination, it appears that there was a small amount of data that was in what I'll call the holding space in Amazon's cloud storage that Illuminate Education was using probably to move that old Alpine data into the EduClimber platform. A hacker accessed that holding pattern data through Amazon's cloud storage, and it does not appear that the hacker actually accessed our EduClimber system or EduClimber systems that Illuminate was managing. So at this point in time, given the amount of work that would go into a potential new RFP and migrating all of the data contained within EduClimber, we are proposing that we continue to partner with Illuminate Education in the short term, recognizing that we may want to consider longer term exploring other options that we may have more confidence in. Anything you wanted to add, Dr. Summers? that.
Yeah, just that ultimately we want to make sure that the board is informed and that we have your support in terms of taking that step. So this is not something that you have to decide right at this moment, but we wanted to make sure to give you as much of the update as possible and then get direction on what you would like those next steps to look like.
So the root issue is the transfer of data. During the time of transfer, it was hacked, not in the system itself, right? That's what I heard you say.
That's to the best of our understanding through our conversations with the
So
company.
if we were to move again, we would be in the same vulnerability that we just experienced, possibly.
My opinion is that this could happen with any company that's housing data, and there is the potential, if we were to migrate to another company,
Yep.
the same could happen in the future, and we wouldn't have control over that. I should say, we do have a data privacy agreement in place with any vendor that we share data with, and unfortunately, in this case, the vendor was still vulnerable to this compromise.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, finally, there was legislation recently signed by our governor that will establish a early childhood department. The significance of this is that our preschool programming will no longer be directed by the Colorado Department of Education, but instead a new department that will have its own executive director overseeing it. We are not anticipating any changes to funding or our preschool programming for the upcoming school year, but we are planning for a significant transition the following school year. The legislation requires a local coordinating organization to manage funding for a region, which is yet to be specified, and all what we call the Colorado Preschool Program funding will, in the year 2023-24, funnel through that coordinating organization rather than directly to districts. The consideration here is that the school district will be competing for funds with all preschool programs versus just those that have qualified in the past through the school district's partnerships. So essentially, families will be able to access funding for in-home preschools as well as private preschools, in addition to still choosing the district as an option. So we'll keep you informed as this continues to develop.
Any questions, comments? Thank you, Amber.
Okay,
We
thank you.
appreciate it very much. So there's work session item B5, future board meeting schedule.
Mr. President, with all due respect, I think we could probably table this one since we don't have all 5 board members here to discuss calendar time.
Happy to. Let's move on to board member reflections then. Ron, we'll start with you and work back.
No reflections, thank you.
Thank you. Teresa,
I don't have anything to add right now either. Thanks.
Tiffany.
I do. I want to remind everyone who may be still listening, and I wanted to share with my fellow board members, today is National Teacher Appreciation Day. And here in D38, we also appreciate our teachers and all of our staff because it takes a team to educate all of our children and represent our community. And during the breakfast that we were at this morning at Lewis Palmer Elementary School, I stayed for the staff meeting. And something that the principal, Devon Johnson, read statements that teachers had submitted at the beginning of the school year on why they teach. They don't teach because they want summers off. They don't teach because it's an easy job. Almost every single one of those teachers responded that they teach because they want to make a difference in the lives of a child. They teach because a teacher influenced them to teach. They teach for the kids. And that is what D38 is. That's why I think we are all here, is for the kids. And when we talk about where we go, next steps, I want to be able to personally honor those that teach our kids. And I want to be able to make up that gap. And while the legislature hasn't increased our per pupil funding, they've increased it throughout the entire state of Colorado. And so we, as a community, it's not up to each of us board members to decide where or how, not how, but how much we can give our teachers. Ultimately, it's up to the community to get behind our teachers. And so my perspective is it's not up to me, it's up to the community. And if I don't give the community the opportunity to voice, then I'm not doing right by our teachers either. And so this discussion that we've been having today regarding a future MLO, I think it's a valuable discussion to have. And I want to continue this because I would like to hear what the community has to say, because these teachers teach for our kids. Every one of us, if you can read, thank a teacher. That's all.
Thank you. I again wish Matt had been here today. A great conversation. Thank you, Dr. Summers, and all the administration, and Ryan and your firm for what you've prepared. Excellent work.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll adjourn till May 16th at 6 p.m. here for our regular board meeting.
Thank you all. What's your schedule looking like?
I'm going to run over to the high school, and then I have a meeting at 1, so I won't be, I'll